We're going to talk about the three global health systems now. There's traditional medicine, modern medicine, and natural health. And all three of those focus within childbirth on three global goals. They all want, number one, a live mother and a live baby. That's the most important. And I'll talk in a future video about why it's not a healthy mother and healthy baby. The second global goal around childbirth has to do with suffering. The third global goal around childbirth has to do with recovery of the mother and the baby in the short, medium, and long term. Pregnancy, childbirth, and the newborn period exist within these three systems. Compared to the rest of life, pregnancy, birth, and newborn period is very small, yet it's existentially important. Life is long, pregnancy less than 1 year, birth a few hours to several days, but it has an intense focus. The newborn period usually lasts until the baby smiles. This statement is a universal truth. Pregnancy and childbirth are normal life events. These three systems, however, are actually asking, what does the word normal, natural, or physiological mean? And so we have an interface between this universal truth, the three health systems, and the three global childbirth goals. I want you to contemplate this around the goal number one, a live mother and a live baby. I want you to imagine 1,000 women of childbearing age. None of them are pregnant, but take a moment to think about those 1,000 women. Not 1,000 women in your community, not 1,000 women who are 26, 1,000 women globally, worldwide. The whole range of childbearing women. Put 1,000 of those women in your mind. They're not pregnant, but they're childbearing. How many problems could those 1,000 women have? They can be living all over the world. They could be living in war or drought, in poverty. They could have one or more diseases, genetic problems, have had accidents, live where they're abused. When I teach and ask, 50% of the people that I ask say that all of the women could have a problem. And the other 50% say 70 to 80%. So we're talking about number one, live mother and live baby. So now those 1,000 women are pregnant. Some of the problems that they have go away. Others can come along. The baby can have problems, or the baby impacting the mother can bring up problems. And now those 1,000 women are all giving birth. We know that many of the problems that she has aren't going to impact birth. New problems can come up for the mother or the baby. So keep in mind that this is the primary goal of childbirth, a live mother and a live baby. What can we infer from this question? In reality, there are a lot of risks that can impact birth. Few of them become problems. Most of those problems will self-resolve, and others can be helped within any of those three health systems, traditional, modern, or natural health. Very few become tragedies. The number one, live mother and live baby. Most women live and most babies live. But having few tragedies doesn't mean that there are few problems, and it doesn't mean that there are few risks. Let's look at the second goal, suffering. Why is suffering common in all cultures? Women suffer in childbirth. You've heard that expression. That's an expression used in all cultures. Prior to surgical birth, all women labored. Labor is a word for hard work. No woman knows what her birth's going to be like. Every woman had contractions. The time it took for a woman to get a baby out of her body didn't determine her ability to cope. Women don't know when it will be over. And many women thought I was going to die. And yes, some women learned or discovered skills in their first birth, or particularly in their second birth when they realized they didn't die. And it will be comments like, I focused on my breathing more. I focused on relaxing more. I didn't get into the labor as quickly. I just went about my business until the labor really heated up. But not all women discover that. The global goal number three, recovery of the mother and the baby, short-term, medium-term, and long-term. You're chiropractors. You're working with mothers and babies who need help in recovering after the birth, even if they had the most natural birth at home, in the water, either as a free birth or with a midwife. You know this. You know that birth can cause problems for both the mother and the baby. And you also know, as I know and Common Knowledge Trust knows, and as women know, is that this is a big taboo area. It's still very, very hidden. In fact, sadly, women accept body damage from birth. In general, these three health systems, traditional, modern health, and natural health, are practical. They're geographically dependent. That can be village to village, state to state, country to country. They're cultural. They're extremely diverse and can be used in all areas of life. Childbirth is just one area. There can be lots of conflicting stuff in all of the three health systems, and they change. And spirituality can be included. Let's look at the overview of these three health systems. Traditional health is within every culture and always has been worldwide throughout time and place, sometimes just within each village. Very geographically specific because of what they have available to them to create some of their health systems around. Most of them are very, very sophisticated, and they have always existed worldwide and can be connected to ceremony. Modern medicine, well, that started really in 1800 as the German scientific method. But when we go back and look at the Greek, the Roman, Islamic, the Chinese sophisticated health systems, are those traditional health systems or precursors to modern medicine? Does size matter that those systems were very big compared to just a village system? Does the fact that those systems had written material matter? Does it matter that those systems did research? Do people consider village traditional health or cultural traditional health to be more primitive? When modern medicine began to develop around 1800, barbers were doing surgery. Modern medicine has had a very rapid evolution, and it uses and rejects traditional knowledge. It's estimated that 40% of medicines are derived from plants. It prides itself on using a scientific method. It focuses on pathology and curing diseases. Natural health care has been around for a while. I mean, take a look at European herbalism. And this is where these systems sort of fall in with each other. Chinese herbalism, meditations, and chiropractic was part of the natural health system. David Palmer was born in Canada and came to the U.S. But the natural health movement that we know now really took off in the 60s, and that's when I became involved in the early 1970s. Natural health care used many elements from diverse traditional systems, but they were tiny elements of a tiny fraction of the extensive and diversified traditional health systems, which really has never been investigated. Natural health blended it all. Things like acupuncture, homeopathy, herbalism, meditation, yoga. And they developed new things, chiropractic, kinesiology, Rolfing. So many new things. And the natural health movement tends to be quite anti-medical, and it may combine spirituality. Let's look more deeply as to how traditional health care deals with pregnancy, childbirth, and the newborn period. Well, they bookend birth. Go ahead and research traditional childbirth practices, and what you're going to find are cultural lists of do's and don'ts in pregnancy. And those are being put in place in pregnancy with the hope that the number one global goal will be achieved, a live mother and a live baby. And those do's and don'ts can be extensive. Don't sit in a doorway, it'll obstruct your labor. Don't wear something tight around your waist. Do the same thing. Have sex, don't have sex. Live with this family, no, live with that family. This is what you eat, this is what you don't eat. This is what you look at, this is what you don't look at. Don't think about this, do think about that. And all traditional cultures are anxious around childbirth because pregnancy and childbirth are normal life events. The way the traditional cultures interpret the words normal, natural, and physiological is that anything that might happen could happen. So they are highly observant because anxiety creates observation. And observation gives any individual the ability to respond and not react. And traditional people are skilled in absolutely all aspects of life because they don't have any other system to fill in the gaps. And traditional people are incredibly accepting of a wide range of what living is. Traditional cultures also bookend the newborn period, full of do's and don'ts around that, very specific culturally. Often women are secluded until the baby smiles. This is to protect the mother particularly, because traditional cultures expect that they can have babies die in this period. Traditional cultures have very little focus on how to give birth or the use of skills to give birth. For example, using a stool in birth is not equal to a woman having skills. Using a rebozo is not equal to a woman doing the birth with skills. Some cultures do prepare the body for birth. Zimbabwe, they have a root that's very soapy. They massage their vagina until they can get their fist in there. Other cultures heat the vagina. A lot of cultures massage women. But skills like breathing, relaxation, touch, communication, positioning, and others, those are not passed down in traditional cultures. No traditional culture that I went to, 30 of them, had any shared set of how to birth skills for women. And I'll give you an example of this in Pakistan. I taught in very remote rural villages in Pakistan as well as in the city. I taught very conservative or liberal Muslims, conservative or liberal Christians, Baha'i people, and Hindus. No culture teaches skills. I asked in all of the classes when I went into the villages, how did your mother teach you to breathe in labor? And there'd be dead silence. And I'd wait. Then some woman would say, my mother told me to breathe fast and shallow. And another woman would go, that's not what my mother told me. She told me to breathe deep and slow. That's not what my mother told me. My mother told me to hold your breath when it hurts. That's not what my mother told me. My mother told me, don't make a sound, you'll embarrass yourself. That's not what my mother told me. My mother told me, scream all you want because it hurts. That's not what my mother told me. My mother told me to do X, and I tried, and it didn't work. That's not what my mother told me. My mother told me there's nothing you can do because there's no way to know what your birth's going to be like. So every village knew that there was no common skills. And yet, in every village, if you ask the same women, how do you make that chapati or roti? Every woman would have the same 11-step skills to make the chapati. And in the skills video, we will talk about effective skills. Therefore, in traditional cultures, the preparation, the bookend of the do's and don'ts in pregnancy is not about how to give birth, but because people in traditional communities rely on themselves, they do the best they can. And when they can't do it in a practical manner, they reach out in the spiritual. In many cultures, women give birth on their own. They just go off by themselves. In other cultures, women go off with women in the family, and they can do that for months at a time. And in other cultures, they birth wherever they live, or they birth wherever they are. Few cultures worldwide ever had a profession of midwifery. When we think of the midwifery profession that people think about, it is from recent European history. And few cultures have midwifery apprentices. Usually if someone's at a birth, it's by accident. And you need to think why. The size of traditional communities range from 200 people to about 2,000 people. Most of these communities have between 1 and 7 births a year, if that. There are very few births. And so our idea of traditional birth isn't based on the diversity of traditional childbirth worldwide. The World Health Organization eventually came out with a traditional birth attendant course, and that had a list of 10 things in pregnancy and 10 things in birth that the traditional birth attendants should refer to a clinic. But when our trust had a gathering in Zimbabwe of traditional birth attendants in 1998, I talked to several hundred traditional birth attendants there, and even though they follow the guidelines of the TBA program, that's not what bothers them. They only have 2 things that bother them. Do you know what they might be? Think about it. We're talking about the first global goal, live mother and live baby. So what are the two things that if you were at a birth and there was nobody to back you up, what are the two things you'd be most concerned about that could impact goal number one? One is the baby just doesn't come out. If the baby doesn't come out, the baby will die and the mother will eventually die. And if a woman bleeds too much, now they're not as concerned with the quick bleeds because they usually stop. It's the slow trickle bleeds. All traditional cultures accept babies dying, but they don't want mothers to die because there are few childbearing women in each culture. Their communities are very small. So how does traditional healthcare deal with suffering? Well, they don't like it, but they accept it because there's no way to know what your birth is going to be like until it unfolds. So you don't know if women are going to suffer or cope well or have an easy birth or a very challenging one. But traditional life is very strong, and there is a very broad acceptance that life is not easy. That's not a pessimistic statement. It's just that they have to make everything in life. And so you have to work hard. And giving birth is hard work, just crunched into a very short time frame. So in traditional communities, how do they deal with the third, recovery of the mother and baby, short-term, medium, and long-term? Frankly, there's not much focus on that, except for that seclusion period, because that's one effort to help the mother particularly to have good recovery before she has to go back out and work. They do their best, and women in traditional communities live with the repercussions of childbirth. In modern medical care, the scientific method, they bookend birth in pregnancy as well. They do it through assessments, monitoring procedures, either done by general practitioner, an obstetrician, or a midwife. The purpose is to detect risks that could become problems in order to prevent tragedies. And those assessments and monitoring and procedures, as they were called in the 70s, continue in birth. But in the 80s, the natural birth movement called them interventions, with the implication that they were unnecessary and imposed on women. How does modern medicine deal with these three global childbirth goals? Well, in the 1970s, when I gave birth, there was a 5% cesarean rate. Even back then, they accepted that babies could die in birth. But the cesareans were to try to save a woman's life. In the 1980s, modern people became more risk-averse. Feminist movement, birth control, safe termination, huge changes. People have fewer children, and they wanted their children to live. How does modern medicine and childbirth deal with suffering in childbirth? Well, my mother was knocked out. I was given an intramuscular pain shot, and now we have epidurals. And how does modern medicine deal with recovery of the mother and baby, short-term, medium, and long-term? Very few appointments, that's separation between obstetrics and pediatrics, and they don't really do too much. So now let's turn our attention to the natural birth movement, using natural health. That bookends birth in pregnancy as well, and they do it through exercise, diet, think positively, maybe pelvic floor exercises, the use of herbs, the reboso, acupuncture, Webster technique, to name a few. And in birth, how does the natural birth movement deal with birth? The trend was for low-risk women to become skilled, not have fear, and to use those skills to achieve three goals: a natural birth, pain-free labor, without medical care. And back then, there were no choices. By the 80s to the present, the next childbirth trend was all about making a birth plan for low-risk women so that they could achieve a natural birth, pain-free labor without medical care, and also things like home birth and midwifery care. That trend was full of choices, but no skills. And of course, the Webster technique and ICPA has grown, particularly during this latter phase. So how does the natural birth movement deal with the newborn period? Not much, except breastfeeding on demand. How does natural birth movement deal with the three global birth goals? First one, live mother and live baby. Natural birth movement doesn't do much about it. It's just assumed that all will be okay and that you should just take away medical care. The natural birth movement just trusts that pregnancy and childbirth are normal life events, and to them they mean easy, good, and successful. How's the natural birth movement deal with suffering? Not much. There was a shift in the use of words. Don't use the word pain. Use the word rushes or waves. Be instinctive. Get out of your thinking brain and into your primal brain. Don't be afraid, and then you won't have pain. And how does the natural birth movement deal with mothers and babies recovering short and medium and long term? Well, breastfeeding for the baby and maybe pelvic floor exercises for the mother, but not much. So I wanted to look at how ICPA might deal with the 3 global goals around childbirth. Well, ICPA has a salutogenesis model, so it focuses on health and wellness in a broad sense of the word: diet, Webster technique, other natural wellness modalities, mindfulness, yoga, acupuncture, homeopathic herbs, etc. But I would suspect that ICPA members also work with families who also use modern medicine. In other words, a lot of people use blended health care. How does ICPA focus on the global goal number 1, a live mother and a live baby? Well, in some ways, doing the Webster technique in pregnancy is trying to do that, isn't it? You want a baby to come out of a woman's body easily. You don't want the baby can't come out. How do you focus on 2, suffering? And how do you focus on 3, recovery in the short, medium, and long term for the mother and the baby? You give care to them. You're the International Chiropractic Pediatric Association. So you give care. That's a high value to you, to have good recovery in short, medium, and long term for the mother and the baby. So let's look at common knowledge trust and how it deals with the 3 goals. So common knowledge trust holds the concept that it's just beneficial when you're pregnant to self-learn birth and birth coaching skills and to use those skills to work through the activity of birthing your baby. In all circumstances, it's your baby's birth. It's an activity you're doing with your baby. Use skills to do that activity. You'll birth better. And birthing better skills are all about getting a baby out of a woman's body. The pink kit that Jeannie had is the body skills that mostly men developed, fathers, because they look at a big pregnant woman and go, oh, I get it, big object in a container, got to get the object out, can't change the object, got to open up the container. Does that matter for a live mother and a live baby? Well, in traditional birth, if that's one of the biggest problems, the baby doesn't come out, the baby dies, the mother dies, then you and us are working to increase the ability of a baby to get out of a woman's body. So how does common knowledge trust, the concept and skills, deal with 2, suffering? That was always a high focus of Birthing Better Families, because the skills developed during that childbirth trend of skills, Lamaze and Bradley, and families wanted more adaptable, adjustable, more sustainable skills, and a broader range of them. And this is where the concept comes into fruition, is not suffering, or being able to cope, manage, work through, deal with, handle, stay on top of, and feel in control. So how does common knowledge trust, the concept and the skills, deal with women and babies recovering short and medium and long term? Well, we do it through preparing the body, which goes well with the Webster technique, which is a professional technique done on women to balance the pelvis and the nervous system. And the Birthing Better skills we developed for ourselves. They open the pelvis and help us learn how to soften the internal soft tissue so that we can get our baby out easily, which provides greater recovery, along with the other skills that we use to work through the activity of birthing our baby. Now, keep in mind in this concept that it's beneficial and common sense to self-learn birth and birth coaching skills. That concept includes all of the skills-based methods. And the reason we're asking ICPA members to follow a simple protocol is so that ICPA can begin to see which of the skills-based systems are effective with these 3 global childbirth goals. And now please watch the video on childbirth concepts. All childbirth concepts exist within health systems and most often are cultural. I want to recap what is the most important takeaways in this video and why this new revitalized childbirth concept is so gentle, embracing, and fundamentally fits in with all health systems for all expectant families, locally, regionally, countrywide, and globally. It just needs to spread. Nuance is very important. Even simple truths can be interpreted differently, and these differences can profoundly impact our lives. Let's review the global childbirth truths. Pregnancy and childbirth are normal and natural and physiological life events. 100% of pregnant women will give birth one way or another. The birth of every baby is important to each family. Giving birth is always an activity each woman does with her baby. There's no way to know what any woman's birth will be like. There are 3 major childbirth global goals: a live mother and baby, how to deal with suffering in childbirth, and recovery for the mother and baby in the short, medium, and long term. Every person, each family, every society, and each healthcare system are focused on these 3 childbirth global goals above all else. How these 3 global health systems process all of the above truths needs to be compared and then put into perspective to this new or revitalized childbirth concept. Traditional and modern medical health systems interpret the words normal, natural, and physiological to mean that anything and everything that might happen could happen. The way the traditional health systems deal with that is through just a gazillion do's and don'ts that women are expected to follow in pregnancy, and those are culturally specific. Modern medicine deals with that interpretation with the use of assessments, monitoring, and procedures. These are not as culturally defined as the do's and don'ts in traditional health systems. Both the traditional and modern health systems have anxiety about the pregnancy and birth phases of life, and they respond to this anxiety through observation and doing things believed to positively impact the number 1 global goal: to end up with a live mother and a live baby. Both traditional and medical health systems assume there are many known and unknown risks, some of which might become problems. Yet both traditional and medical health systems know that few tragedies occur. Both are doing their best to prevent the tragedies. Traditional health systems are doing their best to prevent the death of the mother and are more accepting of the death of babies. Modern medicine is trying to prevent both the death of the mother and babies. Modern medicine aggressively deals with the number 2 global childbirth goal: suffering in childbirth. Traditional health systems don't do much about that other than give support if other people are present at the birth. Modern medicine doesn't do much about the 3rd global childbirth goal: recovery. And traditional health loads the 3rd childbirth goal, the recovery of the mother and baby, short-term, medium, and long-term, with that newborn period that involves a lot of do's and don'ts that are culturally specific. The natural birth movement comes from the natural health movement, and it starts off with an entirely different approach to that first global truth that pregnancy and birth are normal, natural, physiological life events. Within the natural health system, the natural birth movement implies that birth is easy, safe, manageable, relatively risk-free, spontaneous, and that women should just go with the flow. The natural birth movement sees the medical approach to be overbearing, and the natural birth movement believes that the traditional birth model was hands-off and relaxed, and that is not accurate. The second global goal of suffering in birth is pretty much disregarded by the natural birth movement by shifting words such as pain to rushes or waves. In the recovery, the 3rd global childbirth goal, recovery is assumed to occur because pregnancy and childbirth are normal life events that rarely require medical care. However, there is an awareness of the shame, blame, guilt, disappointment, anger, and trauma after birth. Where does this leave us in our conversation? And where does this new childbirth concept to grow a self-learning, skilled birth birthing population fit into these three systems and their different interpretations of global truths. In my experience in living within traditional communities and teaching the skills, is that traditional women wanted to be more skilled. They were very aware that in pregnancy they had lots of rules to follow, but that they lacked essential skills to give birth. Having birthed in 1970 and 1982, my experience in the childbirth concept of the 50s to the 70s is that modern medical healthcare system saw multiple millions of birthing women and coaching dads using some level of skill to cope, therefore reducing the suffering in the second global childbirth goal. And they loved working with these multiple millions of women. And all of these multiple millions of women from the 50s to the 70s lacked any choices. From the 80s onwards, healthcare workers saw fewer and fewer skilled families as the childbirth trend shifted away from skills and towards information and choices. My experience in the past 50 years in the natural wellness and the natural birth model is that there has been no interest at all in this new or revitalized childbirth concept because it goes against the fundamental belief that pregnancy and childbirth are normal life events and that cows and cats aren't taught to birth, and therefore women don't need to be taught to birth. It became assumed that women know how to birth, and that's not a global truth. That's unique to the natural birth movement. For both traditional health systems and modern medicine, just because women do birth, it doesn't mean we know how to birth. The concept and the birthing better skills that I and hundreds of mothers and fathers developed gave us the experience that when we were skilled, we birthed better in all birth experiences. And remember, the concept and the birthing better skills developed while there was still a skills-based childbirth trend in the United States, because we knew that even imperfect skills or a small number of skills, when we used them, hugely reduced our suffering because we felt we coped better, or we had a husband or another person who could help us cope better and stay in control. In some ways, the third global childbirth goal was also being assisted when we had skilled birthing families. Using skills had a profound and positive impact. Andrea, the midwife in New Zealand, discovered this. She wasn't looking for this benefit, but she discovered it, is that skilled families, fathers and mothers, felt more empowered and confident and proud of their experience. They were more likely to be able to solve problems together in the newborn period. And in subsequent births, they took time to consciously and more deeply and broadly learn skills to fill in the gaps that occurred in their first birth that were not likely to occur in their second birth, because every birth is different. Also, skilled families, when they told their birth stories, didn't focus as much on what happened to or around them, but more on how they handled themselves. ICPA can lead the way to this inclusive change. The question is, do you want to? Common Knowledge Trust is here to help you do this effectively without it taking a lot of time. So now we have to ask the questions. How does this new concept deeply and profoundly impact these overarching global truths? That we know 100% of pregnant women will give birth one way or another in any healthcare system or any childbirth concept that she knows or is around her, and that she is always going to do this activity on her own with her baby. And really the choice is simple. Either we, humans, believe it's common sense and beneficial for birthing women and fathers and others to become skilled to do this life-transforming and infrequent activity, or we don't. Let me ask you this question. The next time you make love or are hungry, are you pleased that you have some level of skill for these physiological activities? Giving birth is more important because it's less frequent. If we don't elevate this new revitalized childbirth concept to self-learned skills, then what are we actually saying to ourselves as women? In the past 50 years, I've asked thousands of men and fathers who have been at a birth this simple question: would you rather be skilled or not if you had to do the activity of birthing your baby? Okay, guys, what's your answer? Now, please watch the video on the childbirth concepts, the ones that you know and the ones that I know, and to get a clear understanding of this new and revitalized childbirth concept, we're asking ICPA members to tip into our societies. All childbirth concepts exist within health systems, and most of them are cultural. This concept is universal.